what I would like to talk about is what happened in France with regards to Notre Dame, the cathedral that was burnt to the ground, and why the media was so quick to dismiss that this was vandalism, that this was an act of vandalism, so quick that even whilst the flames were burning, Akuma, the microphone will have to face me to pick up the voice, that even whilst the flames were still burning, they said that it was an accident, that it was caused by the renovation works. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that it was an act of vandalism. What I am questioning is why the lamestream media was so quick to assume that it wasn't. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because of a non-reported story about what is happening in France. In 2018, the French Ministry of the Interior, which is responsible for security and protecting the rights of French citizens, listed the number of anti-Muslim attacks as 100, a new all-time low in France since 2010. Anti-Semitic attacks were numbered as growing to 183 attacks. That is an increase of 358 attacks since 2010, year on year. The number of anti-Christian attacks increased, listen to this number, to 1,063. 1,063. That's the French government's own numbers of anti-Christian attacks. 875 churches were vandalized. 129 churches were robbed. 59 cemeteries were vandalized. And yet, the British media talk about the rise of Islamophobia in France and the alt-right. But they don't talk about the rise of Christophobia in France. Silence, nothing to say. When the number of attacks against Christians is much higher. Statistically, every day, at least 2 churches are vandalized in France. 80% of violence that is aimed against someone because of their belief, according to the French government, is committed against Christians. And yet, the liberal media never talk about the rise of anti-Christian prejudice in France. The start of 2019 shows a big rise in anti-Christian acts. Examples from this year: Saint-Sulpice church in Paris, firebombed by someone unknown. Sainte-Hélène de la Voix Cathedral in Turn, firebombed, started by a 17-year-old whilst the church was being restored. Notre Dame of children in Nimes. The tabernacle was destroyed. The hosts were chucked onto the floor. The cross was drawn on the outer wall in human excrement. San Nicholas in Juarez, vandalized 3 times in 10 days. The 19th century statue of Our Lady Mary was shattered. Christ on the cross was thrown to the floor. The Basilica of St. Denis, whose organ was 200 years old, was destroyed. The stained glass windows shattered. It's a 13th century church with the burial site of 66 French kings and 81 princesses and princes. Notre Dame of Good Hope in Dijon. The consecrated host was scattered over the floor. The mass books were torn up. This February, in Inez Madani, a 22-year-old Muslim, was condemned to 8 years of prison for trying to blow up the Notre Dame in 2016. When the French Interior Ministry was asked about the proportion of degradations by groups, the ministry refused to give the details, saying all religious buildings must be respected. The government's response for National Plan to Fight Against Racism and Anti-Semitism was deployed by the state in March 2018. But the French media and the British media demonstrate gross indifference to anti-Christian prejudice in France, despite the fact that statistically it is the highest form of prejudice in France. The British media, like Channel 4 News, talks about the dangers of Islamophobia and the alt-right in France, ignoring the fact that by far the greatest level of persecution is directed against Christians. Why? Why the double standards? Why? Why the ignorance? Many of you standing here today who are listening on recorded video probably never even heard about what I've just talked about. The reason why the liberal media will not talk about the persecution of Christians in France is because they don't want you to stand up for Christians. They don't want you to have a sense of solidarity with Christians. But as Christians who follow the teachings of the apostles and the prophets, we have no choice. Christians are called to stand in solidarity with one another, because as Christians, we are one body in Christ. We are one family. We are part of the same bride. We are one church, one holy nation. And so, when our brothers and sisters are being persecuted anywhere in the world, it is the concern of Christians everywhere in the world to stand with them. How can we allow our family to be persecuted and do nothing? How can we allow attacks on our own body and do nothing? How can we allow the bride of Christ to be persecuted and do nothing? Christians, free yourself from the liberal media and the liberal narrative. You have a stake in the fight that Christians are facing in France. So tell the truth, even as the liberal media tells the lie. Speak the truth, even as the liberal media seeks to ignore the plight of Christians in France. And ask yourself, in the light of all these examples, is it fair to dismiss out of hand the possibility that the burning of the cathedral in Notre Dame was deliberate? I leave it with you. Thanks be to God. Any questions? Then I wish you good night and God bless. I'm going now. Thank you.
Okay, if you do speak to JC, tell him to give me his email address.
Yeah.
We can't let a personal strife stop the work of God.
I will do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, the one was
Don't worry, bro. Thank you so
I
much.
can send the videos for him to edit.
Yeah. Don't worry, bro. Thank you so
It'll
much.
be fine, it'll be fine. I think I'll just put that noise a few things as well, because I think when there's no...
Yeah, bro. We'll talk. We'll talk. Yeah. You see, if the environmentalists can do it, why can't we Christians do it? My point being, if they can do it,
That's true.
by their activism, they force the question of the environment to the centre of politics.
Not even that though. One thing I would give the Muslims, what they did in Birmingham, when they withdrew their kids from the LGBT classes and stuff. I admire them, what they did.
Christians need to learn to stand up for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, bro, I'll walk out with you.
Yeah, come.
I just want to grab Leon and make sure that he's got his camera, because we're not. Yeah, we're all done. I didn't want you to leave your. I didn't want to leave your camera unprotected. Yeah. Thank you so much, Leon. Are we still filming? Subscribe to COE. Support the Bentley Fund. And also subscribe to SOCO Films. SOCO Films. You'll find us on YouTube.
not subscribe.
Content over everything. The second best channel in Speaker's Corner.
Best channel is Speakers Corner.
Look after yourself, bro. Take care. Yeah, respect. Yeah, I'm going now. Content over everything. From your humanity.
Come, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
One of them with evidence and substance.
Let's see. You want to stay? You want to stay instead of him?
1 second, Adnan. You're getting like a fool in a minute. Give me some of that action.
I
There
will
we go.
stay. I'm here to stay. Every single claim these Christian missionaries will bring, we will rebut it with evidence and substance. Unlike them. Now